We are continuing with our reading of Iqbal's Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam. And last time we looked at his comments on Ibn Rushd and Ghazali. And today we are going to continue with the new paragraph, and that's about Kant and the comparison of Kant's mission or his work and Ghazali's mission and Ghazali's work. And that's very important. But before we proceed, I want to just take a stock of what we have been doing until now. And I just wanted to emphasize that even though we have been criticizing Iqbal at certain points and questioning his claims, etc., and that's part and parcel of Iqbal's own project of critically and independently continuously assessing modern thought, based on Islamic worldview. And obviously Iqbal's own assessments are also subject to this criteria. And whatever we do is also subject to the same criteria. So it's an ongoing process. And even when we are criticizing Iqbal and rejecting some of his claim, we are still engaging in his project because we are trying to critically and independently assess modern thought. And also, it's Iqbal's part of Iqbal's project or continuation or development of his project, because the greatness of Iqbal in his prose writing, at least, and obviously his poetry is totally of different caliber or different level, so that needs to be assessed separately. But even when we are criticizing Iqbal's claims and his assertions, we are still engaging in his project and we're trying to develop his thought, because what is important in Iqbal is the issues he raises. And that also includes the personalities he highlights. And just to give a few examples of the sort of things we looked at, so we started with philosophy and the nature of philosophy and religion. And the status of philosophy and their relationship. And then that is related to the crucial issue of reason and its nature, and revelation and its nature and their relationship. So these are the core issues of the modern thought, and any assessment and critical independent assessment of modern thought from an Islamic perspective, because modern thought or modern philosophy, modern thought is sort of justified, and philosophy sort of replaces religion in modern thought in a sense. Not entirely, because there are other, and by philosophy we also mean, science and other modern subjects, but philosophy sort of theorizes them at the higher abstract level. And the conception of religion and their role, their respective role in the modern civilization and modern education system, and that is related to the role of reason, and so the whole epistemological issue becomes central to modernity. And this question of the role of reason and its nature is the central issue of the modern thought, because in a sense because modern thought emerged out of a Christian civilization through at least partially destroying it and rejecting it, so it can't get rid of this central question of reason and its nature, and explicitly and implicitly their relation to the possibility of other sources of higher sources of knowledge like revelation. And if we assess the modern thought from Islamic perspective, similarly these issues become very important, because like Christian civilization, Islamic civilization also is at odds with the modern thought in its assertion of the superiority of reason over revelation, and its claims about the self-sufficiency of reason, and especially the subjective reason and all those things. So these are the issues which Iqbal raises in the first two paragraphs of this chapter. And then he raises the issue of rational foundation of Islam, and the role of reason in Islam, the role of kalam and philosophy. And from there we got into all that debate on different schools of kalam and philosophy, like Mu'tazila and philosophers and Asharis and Maturidis and Fuqaha and Ahl al-Hadith and Hanabila, and all those different Kalami and non-Kalami schools which dealt with these issues and are still dealing with these issues. The different merits and demerits of those, and how we can continue that tradition in the face of the rise of modernity in the heartlands of Islam. And then he raises the question of Greek thought, because Greek thought, and that's a question which is important in many aspects, but crucially in two aspects. First, because modern thought, like modern Western thought, in many ways consisted in returning to the Greek roots. And rejecting the Christian Roman tradition, at least that part of Christian Roman tradition which was deviation from Greco-Roman thought. And the second aspect in which modern thought is a Greek thought is important is because the Greeks before the modernity, Greek thought was one of the main systematic alternative to the Islamic thought with which Islamic civilization had to deal with. And if today we are looking at modernity in a sense, an era of Greek civilization, and Islamic thought is confronted today again by powerful, rational, systematic, alternative ways of thinking, then in order to deal with this new way of thinking, it's important that we sort of revisit and remember our first encounter with Western thought, or more Greek thought, which was Greek thought, and those people who were central figures in that. And in a sense, different groups who are taking modern thought seriously in the Islamic world today, and Iqbal's days, look back at the different Islamic responses to the Greek thought, and depending on their stance towards modernity, they praise or criticize or downplay or highlight different traditions which confronted and different attitudes and different stances which emerge in that first encounter. So Ashari school is one, Ghazali is another, philosophers are another. So Kalam, within Kalam you have different schools, Mu'tazilas and Asharis and Maturidis and Ahl al-Hadith, or later Hanabala. And the Ghazali has its own philosophers. Ibn Rushd, part of philosopher in a sense, but also separate from them. And depending on how they see modernity, whether favorably or unfavorably, or they want to confront it or they want to just ignore it, they at least partially justify their stances towards a reading of Islamic history and a reading of that first encounter. So the how we understand the role of Kalam and different schools of Kalam and Ghazali philosophers in their confrontation with the Greek thought, at least is partially colored by what is our stance today. So it's not purely a historical investigation in that sense. So raising this question of Greek thought, so that's why Iqbal raises the question of Greek thought and how they confronted Greek thought and the different schools. Different school confronted it, and that will partially define his own stance towards modernity. So his reading of the nature of Greek philosophy and his reading of different Islamic responses to Greek philosophy and Greek philosophy are not just historical exercises or theoretical exercises, because they are interest based, and they are interest based in the sense that his readings show his present stance. That is how he's going to his own attitude towards modernity and how he wants to assess modernity and different interpretations of modernity. So, in fact, all talks about Greek thought and its response here is basically, actually, implicitly and explicitly paving the ground for his assessment of modernity, his confrontation with modernity, his attitudes toward modernity, and his attitude towards different stances and attitudes toward modernity within the Islamic world. And similarly, the personalities he highlights, like Ghazali, Ibn Rushd, and Kant, for example, and his particular reading of these, at least partially guided by his interest in understanding and developing a specific response to an attitude towards modernity, and also rejecting certain other specific attitudes and stances towards modernity. So in this sense, Iqbal's work is relevant and perennial in a sense, because as long as modernity is there, and as long as Islam is an independent civilization there, and it's in need of constantly and independently and critically assessing and taking a stance and a particular attitude towards modernity. And that's the greatness of Iqbal, and that's the greatness of his work, and that's the relevance of his work for me. So our critique of Iqbal on a specific point is always related to that general framework, which might not always be obvious. But this is just a first reading, and we are going to hopefully read it again, or portion of it, or parts of it, and do other related things to revive this project and consolidate it, and to deepen it, hopefully, at least at certain level. So I think that's what I wanted to say, because we are going to look at a lot of specific points in the next paragraph as well. So I thought it was relevant or required to reiterate what we had started with in the introduction, in the first couple of videos. Thank you.